What would you do if your only inheritance from a wealthy relative was a cheap, empty wooden box Owen Gallagher was ready to throw his grandfather's final gift into the fire until a frustrated slam against a desk triggered a mechanical click that changed his life and his family's history forever? The mahogany-paneled office of Richard Hayes, attorney at law, smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and impending disappointment. Rain lashed against the tall arched windows overlooking downtown Boston, mirroring the stormy anxiety brewing in Owen Gallagher's chest. At 34, Owen was drowning. His architectural firm had gone under 6 months ago, leaving him with a mountain of debt, a maxed-out line of credit and collection agencies calling his phone from blocked numbers at all hours of the day. He had spent the last 2 years caring for his grandfather, Henry Gallagher, watching the once formidable man slowly fade away in a sterile hospital bed. Henry had been a cold, enigmatic figure, a former aeronautical engineer who retired early and spent the last 4 decades of his life collecting rare books and obscure mechanical antiquities. Everyone in the family knew Henry was wealthy. The sprawling Victorian estate in Brookline alone was worth nearly $4 million. Owen, being the only living relative who had bothered to visit the old man in his final years, assumed he would be taken care of. He didn't want millions. He just wanted enough to clear his debts and start over. Richard Hayes, a man who looked like he hadn't smiled since the late 90s, cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. He looked down at the thick legal document on his desk, then up at Owen. "As you know, Owen, your grandfather was a very particular man." Hayes began, his voice dry as dust. His final wishes were explicitly detailed. "Just read it, Richard," Owen said, bouncing his leg nervously. Hayes nodded. "The entirety of the Gallagher estate, including the Brookline property, the liquid assets and the antique collections, are to be liquidated. The proceeds will be placed into a blind trust benefiting the Global Heritage Restitution Fund." The words hung in the air heavy and suffocating. Owen felt the blood drain from his face. Charity. He left everything to charity. The man barely donated a canned good during his entire life. "What about me?" Hayes flipped to the final page of the will. "To my grandson Owen." Hayes read aloud, his tone shifting into a poor imitation of Henry's gruff cadence. "I leave the sum total of my worldly wisdom, encapsulated in the cedar box I kept on my writing desk. May he find the value in it that I always knew was there." Hayes reached under his desk and placed a small, profoundly ordinary wooden box on the polished mahogany surface. Owen stared at it. It was about 8 inches long and 6 inches wide, made of scuffed cedar wood with cheap, tarnished brass hinges. There was no lock, no intricate carving, no decorative inlay. It looked like something you would buy at a craft store for $5. "That's it," Owen whispered, his voice trembling with a potent mix of anger and disbelief. 2 years of driving him to dialysis, listening to his paranoid rants about the government, cleaning out his gutters, and he leaves me a cigar box. "I am sorry, Owen," Hayes said, though his eyes betrayed no emotion. "That is the entirety of your inheritance." Owen grabbed the box. It was feather light. He flipped the brass latch and threw the lid open. Nothing. Not a dime. Not a letter. Just the faint smell of old tobacco and dust. He didn't say another word. He turned on his heel and walked out of the office, stepping out into the freezing Boston rain with an empty box and a heart full of resentment. Back in his cramped, dimly lit apartment in South Boston, Owen sat at his small kitchen table. The only light came from the street lamp outside his window, casting long, distorted shadows across the peeling wallpaper. A half-empty glass of cheap bourbon sat next to the cedar box. He had spent the last 3 hours staring at the cursed thing. He had measured it, weighed it in his hands, and scrutinized every inch of the wood grain, praying for a false bottom or a hidden seam. He even tapped a butter knife against the base, listening for a hollow echo. But there was nothing. The internal dimensions matched the external ones perfectly, minus the thickness of the wood. It was exactly what it appeared to be, an empty box. "Worldly wisdom," Owen muttered bitterly, taking a sip of the bourbon. "You arrogant, selfish old man." The stress of the day, the crushing weight of his debts, and the profound sense of betrayal finally boiled over. Owen grabbed the box, intending to hurl it into the trash can across the room. But as he lifted it, his grip slipped. The box crashed down hard onto the solid oak kitchen table, landing squarely on its back corner. Owen winced at the loud crack. He reached out, expecting to see the wood splintered, but it wasn't broken. Instead of a crack, the sound had been a sharp, mechanical click. Owen froze. He leaned in closer. The back panel of the box, the piece of wood housing the brass hinges, had shifted. It was now protruding by a fraction of an inch, revealing a hairline fracture in the seemingly solid wood. His heart began to pound against his ribs. He set his drink down and carefully picked up the box. With trembling fingers, he pressed against the protruding edge. It didn't push back in, it slid sideways. He pushed harder. The entire bottom panel of the box, which he had assumed was a single solid piece of cedar, slid out like a secret drawer. The craftsmanship was impossibly precise. The seams had been entirely invisible to the naked eye. Owen held his breath as the hidden compartment was revealed. It wasn't empty. Inside the shallow, velvet-lined hidden drawer lay 3 items. They were arranged meticulously, almost reverently. The first was a heavy iron skeleton key. It was unlike any key Owen had ever seen. The shaft was unusually thick, and the teeth were cut in a complex, jagged pattern. On the bow of the key, a strange emblem was engraved. A compass rose intersected by a sword. Beneath the emblem, the numbers 404 were stamped into the dark metal. The second item was a faded, slightly curled Polaroid photograph. Owen picked it up by the edges. It was a picture of his grandfather Henry, but he looked decades younger, perhaps in his late 50s. He was standing on a cobblestone street in front of a massive, brutalist concrete building with no windows. Next to him stood a woman. She was strikingly beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled into a tight chignon. She wore a tailored trench coat and held a silver briefcase. Owen had never seen her before in his life. It certainly wasn't his grandmother who had passed away before Owen was born. He flipped the photo over. Scrawled in blue ink in Henry's unmistakable spidery handwriting were the words, "Geneva, November, 1987. The debt is paid, but the ledger remains." Owen frowned, his brow furrowing. The ledger? He looked back down into the compartment. The third and final item was a small, black, leather-bound notebook, no larger than a passport. Owen pulled it out. The leather was worn soft from use. He cracked it open. The pages weren't filled with journal entries or financial accounts. Instead, page after page was covered in tiny, meticulously written alphanumeric codes. A 7-B9-X4-4-Omega-T 2-L 1-Z 99- Delta row after row, column after column. It looked like absolute gibberish. But knowing his grandfather's background in aeronautical engineering and his obsession with Cold War history, Owen knew this wasn't random. It was a cipher. He sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Henry hadn't left him an empty box. He had left him a treasure map disguised to keep it out of the hands of the lawyers, the state, and anyone else who might be looking. But looking for what Owen stayed awake until the sun came up, poring over the ledger, trying to find a repeating pattern or a key to the cipher. He scoured the internet for the emblem on the iron key, but reverse image searches yielded nothing but generic medieval crests. He was exhausted, running on adrenaline and cheap whiskey, but he felt more alive than he had in years. At 7 a.m., the jarring buzz of his apartment intercom shattered the morning silence. Owen jumped, nearly knocking the cedar box off the table. He cautiously approached the intercom on the wall. "Hello," static hissed through the speaker, followed by a smooth, calm voice with a faint European accent. "Mr. Gallagher, good morning. I am terribly sorry to disturb you at this hour, but I believe you have something that belongs to my employer." A chill ran down Owen's spine. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" "My name is not important." "Owen," the voice replied smoothly. "What is important is the cedar box your grandfather's lawyer handed you yesterday afternoon. You are currently in possession of information that you do not understand and, quite frankly, cannot handle. We are willing to offer you a highly lucrative sum to purchase the box and its entire contents, $2 million transferred to your account within the hour." Owen stopped breathing. $2 million. It would solve every problem he had. It was a lifeline. But as he looked back at the table at the cryptic ledger and the photo of his grandfather, a fierce, protective instinct flared up inside him. Henry had hidden this specifically for him. The men at the door hadn't come through legal channels. They were tracking him. "I don't know what you're talking about." Owen lied, his voice remarkably steady. "The box was empty. I threw it in the dumpster behind the lawyer's office." There was a long pause on the other end of the intercom, then a low chuckle. "Do not play games, Mr. Gallagher. We followed you home. We know you still have it. Open the front door of the building, or we will remove it ourselves." Panic seized Owen. He didn't wait to see if they were bluffing. He scrambled to the table, sweeping the key, the photo, and the ledger into his backpack. He grabbed the empty cedar box, shoved it under his sofa, and bolted for the fire escape window in his bedroom. As he threw the window open and stepped out onto the rusted iron grating, he heard the heavy, ominous thud of a crowbar smashing against his apartment's front door lock. The rain had stopped, but the morning air was bitterly cold. Owen scrambled down the fire escape, dropping the last 10 feet into the muddy alleyway below. He hit the ground running, not looking back as he sprinted toward the nearest subway station. He needed help. He needed someone who understood Code's history and the strange circles his grandfather used to run in. There was only one person who fit the bill. An hour later, Owen pushed through the heavy bronze doors of the Boston Public Library. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors until he reached the rare manuscripts archive. Sitting behind a desk piled high with dusty tomes was Dr. Anna Harrington. Anna was a brilliant archivist in her late 60s, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She and Henry had frequently argued over historical documents, and she was the only person Owen knew who wasn't intimidated by his grandfather's abrasive personality. "Owen!" Anna looked up surprised, pushing her reading glasses down her nose. "Good Lord, boy, you look like you've been dragged behind a bus. I heard about Henry. I'm so sorry." "Anna, I need your help." Owen gasped out of breath. He pulled his backpack off and walked behind her desk out of view of the library's main floor. "And I need you to promise you won't tell anyone I was here." He unzipped the bag and placed the iron key, the photograph, and the black ledger on her desk. Anna's eyes widened. She reached out her fingers, hovering over the ledger without touching it. "Where did you get this?" "Henry left it for me, hidden in a box." "Anna, someone just tried to break into my apartment to take it. They offered me $2 million. Anna picked up the photograph, her eyes scanning the brutalist building in the background. Her face paled. "Owen, do you know what this building is?" "He wrote Geneva on the back," Owen said. "It is in Geneva," Anna whispered, her voice tight with fear. It's the Bodenbank depository. It's a private, subterranean vault system. It's not for money, Owen. It's for data, secrets, things that governments want buried. She picked up the heavy iron key, tracing the 404 engraving. And if this is the physical access key to one of their cold storage vaults? She slowly opened the black ledger and stared at the alphanumeric cipher. She swallowed hard. "Owen," Anna said, looking up at him with sheer terror in her eyes. "Your grandfather wasn't just an engineer. This is a visionaire matrix, modified with a one-time pad. This ledger, it's a blackmail file, and whoever is looking for it will absolutely kill you to get it back." The silence in the rare manuscripts archive was deafening. Owen stared at Dr. Anna Harrington, his mind struggling to process the gravity of her words. A blackmail file. His grandfather, the man who spent his Sundays obsessively pruning rose bushes and complaining about the neighbors, was a Cold War extortionist. "Anna, that's impossible." Owen stammered, pacing the narrow aisle between the towering bookshelves. He built navigation systems for commercial airlines. He was an engineer, not a spy. Anna pulled a heavy brass-rimmed magnifying glass from her desk drawer and hovered it over the first page of the black leather notebook. "History is rarely as clean as the official biographies suggest, Owen. Look at these clusters. This isn't just random data. It's a heavily encrypted ledger of financial transactions paired with dates and coordinates. And based on the shift pattern, the decryption key is likely tied to a specific text or a date." She picked up the Polaroid photograph, her eyes darting between the image of Henry and the mysterious woman in the trench coat. November 1987. Geneva. Owen, in the late 80s, there was a massive scandal involving the covert sale of aerospace technology to foreign shell companies. Billions of dollars vanished. The architects of that theft were never caught. Rumors circulated about a whistleblower who had secured the routing numbers and the original stolen blueprints, holding the syndicate hostage. She looked up, her expression grave. The woman in this photo is Catherine Hale. She was an independent intelligence broker. She brokered information between MI6, the CIA, and private defense contractors like Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas. If Henry was working with her, then he was the whistleblower. Owen finished the realization, hitting him like a physical blow. He didn't just know about the theft. He had the proof, and he was using this ledger to keep the syndicate off his back. "And now," Anna whispered, closing the ledger, "they know he's dead. The deterrent is gone, which means they are coming for the only copy of the files." Before Owen could respond, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the archive room groaned open. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor, slow, deliberate, and entirely out of place in the hushed sanctuary of the library. Owen peeked through a gap in the ancient encyclopedias. Two men in immaculate dark charcoal suits were fanning out across the room. One of them had a distinct pale scar running along his jawline. It was the man from the intercom. Panic surged violently in Owen's chest. "They're here!" Anna didn't hesitate. With surprising agility for a woman in her late 60s, she swept the key, the photo, and the ledger back into Owen's backpack and shoved it hard into his chest. "There is a service elevator behind the microfiche cabinets," she instructed, her voice a fierce, hushed whisper. "It goes down to the loading dock on Blagden Street. Run, Owen. If they get their hands on that key, you are a loose end they will tie up permanently." "What about you?" "I am a tenured archivist at a public institution," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I will scream bloody murder if they so much as look at me sideways. Now go." Owen turned and bolted. He wove through the labyrinth of bookshelves, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Behind him, he heard the sharp, urgent shout of the scarred man. "There, stop him!" Owen didn't look back. He sprinted past the microfiche stations, spotted the dull grey doors of the service elevator, and slammed the down button. Nothing happened. The doors were painfully slow. Heavy footsteps were closing in, rounding the corner just 20 yards away. Abandoning the elevator, Owen shoved open the adjacent heavy-fire door and threw himself into the concrete stairwell. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his breathing ragged, his hand gripping the strap of his backpack so tightly his knuckles turned white. He burst out into the damp, freezing Boston air through the loading dock, blending instantly into a crowd of tourists heading toward Copley Square. He walked aimlessly for hours, constantly checking his reflections in shop windows, terrified of every dark suit he saw. He ended up in a dingy diner near Logan International Airport, nursing a cold cup of coffee. He pulled the iron key from his bag. The numbers 404 stared back at him. He checked his bank account on his phone. He had exactly $3,214 to his name, the last of his savings. It wasn't enough to pay his creditors. It wasn't enough to save his old life. But it was enough for a one-way ticket to Switzerland. If Henry had orchestrated this, he had done it for a reason. He hadn't left an empty box to mock Owen. He had left a gauntlet. The men in the dark suits wanted the ledger, but the ledger was useless without the contents of the vault. Owen opened his laptop, logged onto an airline portal, and booked the next red-eye flight to Geneva. He was done running from his grandfather's shadows. He was going to step into them. The air in Geneva was crisp, biting, and smelled faintly of rain and expensive exhaust fumes. Owen arrived at the address Anna had deduced from the photograph, not a traditional bank on the bustling Rue du Rhône, but a massive hypersecure logistics fortress near the airport, the Geneva Freeport. It was a tax-free zone where the world's ultra-wealthy hid their finest art gold and secrets. The building was a monolith of reinforced concrete and tinted glass, bristling with security cameras and armed guards. Owen walked through the sliding glass doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. He approached the pristine white reception desk, feeling wildly out of place in his wrinkled travel clothes and scuffed boots. A severe-looking concierge peered over his rimless glasses. "Bonjour, monsieur. How may I assist you?" Owen didn't speak. He simply unzipped his backpack, reached inside, and placed the heavy iron key with the compass and sword emblem on the polished marble counter. The concierge's demeanor changed instantly. The polite indifference vanished, replaced by a rigid, almost fearful respect. He didn't ask for a name, an ID, or an account number. He simply picked up a brass telephone receiver and spoke quietly in rapid French. Within 90 seconds, a tall, elegantly dressed man with silver hair appeared from a set of frosted glass doors. "Mr. Gallagher, I am Director Lemaire. We have been expecting you for quite some time. Please follow me." Owen followed Lemaire past retinal scanners through 2 sets of air-locked steel doors and into a subterranean elevator that seemed to descend for an eternity. When the doors finally opened, Owen stepped into a cavernous, climate-controlled corridor, lined with hundreds of unmarked, heavy steel vault doors. It felt like a mausoleum for the living. Lemaire stopped in front of a door near the end of the hall. Etched into the brushed steel were the numbers 404. "Your grandfather Henry leased this space in perpetuity in 1988, Lemaire said smoothly. "No one has accessed it since. The protocol dictates that I leave you in private. When you are finished, simply close the door." Lemaire bowed his head slightly and retreated down the hall, disappearing around the corner. Owen stood alone in the deafening silence. His hands shook as he raised the iron key and slid it into the intricate lock. It fit perfectly. With a heavy, satisfying mechanical thud, the internal tumblers shifted. Owen pulled the heavy lever, and the vault door swung open on perfectly oiled hinges. He stepped inside. The vault wasn't filled with stacks of cash or gold bars. In the center of the small, brightly lit room sat a single mid-century modern steel desk. On top of the desk was a neatly stacked pile of heavily redacted government dossiers, a stack of original drafting blueprints, stamped with confidential, and a sleek, modern titanium briefcase. Resting on top of the briefcase was a handwritten letter. Owen picked it up. The handwriting was Henry's, but the strokes were strong and purposeful, unlike the frail scrawl of his later years. My dear Owen, if you are reading this, you found the false bottom? I knew you would. You always had my stubbornness, even when you refused to admit it. I did not build those navigation systems for the commercial airlines, Owen. I built them for the defense sector. In 1986, a syndicate of corporate executives stole my designs, patented them under their own shell companies, and made billions selling them to foreign adversaries. They threatened to kill your father, my son, if I ever spoke out. So I played the quiet, defeated engineer, but in the shadows I hunted them. With the help of Catherine Hale, I drained their offshore accounts. Every cent they made from my stolen life's work I took. I used the ledger you hold to blackmail them into silence, keeping our family safe. I told my lawyer that my estate was to be liquidated into the Global Heritage Restitution Fund. What I did not tell him is that the fund is a private corporate entity, and the bearer shares that control it entirely are inside the titanium briefcase on this desk. The box I gave you was empty because my wealth is not an inheritance. It is a weapon. The men who chased you are the descendants of the thieves I crippled. They want the ledger to find their lost fortunes. Inside the briefcase, you will find access codes to accounts at UBS containing upwards of $1.4 billion legally scrubbed and entirely yours. You will also find the original patents. You now have the power to destroy the men who hunted you. Do not run, Owen. Build your firm. Live your life. And let them know that the Gallagher ledger is finally balanced. With pride, Grandpa Henry, Owen slowly lowered the letter. A profound, overwhelming silence washed over him. The anger, the resentment, the crushing weight of his debts, they evaporated in an instant, replaced by an electric, terrifying surge of power. He wasn't a failure. He was the heir to a hidden empire. He reached out and popped the latches on the titanium briefcase. Inside rested a stack of embossed bearer shares and a heavily encrypted digital hardware wallet, the wealth of kings sitting quietly in a Swiss basement. Owen carefully placed the letter, the blueprints and his grandfather's ledger into the briefcase. He snapped it shut, the sound echoing sharply in the concrete vault. He wasn't going back to Boston to hide. He was going back to buy the bank that was trying to foreclose on him, and then he was going to make a phone call to the men in the dark suits. His grandfather had left him an empty box, but it was Owen who would fill it with their ruin. He turned off the light, stepped out of Vault 404, and locked the door behind him. If you were captivated by Owen's journey from a crushing empty inheritance to uncovering $1 billion Cold War secret, hit that like button right now. Do you think he made the right choice, keeping the empire, or should he have walked away? Let us know in the comments below. Share this incredible real-life mystery with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden history and thrilling stories.